Welcome back to Untethering Shame, the podcast where we dive deep into the societal stories and expectations that tether us to shame and explore how to break free. I'm your host, Kyira Wackett, and today we're tackling a topic that touches millions of lives, the stigma around higher education. Specifically, the idea that you need a college degree to have a successful and fulfilling life. Our guest today is Klein, a longtime editorial writer at the Los Angeles Times and the author of Rethinking College, a guide to thriving without a degree. Karin's book challenges the deeply ingrained societal belief that a four-year degree is the only path to success. Through personal stories, practical advice, and a fresh perspective, she helps readers break free from the shame tied to not pursuing or completing a bachelor's degree. Now, this isn't an anti-college conversation, but rather a call to reimagine education and career pathways in ways that fits each individual. We'll discuss the origins of the college or bust mentality, the concept of degree inflation, and how the workforce and societal expectations are shifting. Karin will also share stories of people who forge their own paths without a traditional degree and offer insights on finding alternative routes to success, whether it's apprenticeships, creative careers, or skills-based learning. So whether you felt shame about your own educational journey or are grappling with how to guide the next generation, this conversation is one you don't want to miss. So get comfortable, turn off all those distractions, and let's dive in. Well, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited that you're here.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, it's been, I know, gosh, we chatted, I don't even remember how long ago now, but I feel like since our conversation, I've had probably 5 or 6 different interactions with people, clients with children that are graduating high school, my daughter who's about to be 5, who's talked about what college means, people all in between there, kids that are thinking about, do I want to go to college? What does this mean? It's just really shifted my perspective, even in just our 20-minute conversation. And so I'm curious, just to kind of dive headfirst into the topic, when people are hearing shame and a college degree, I think many of us are aware that there's a pressure around education and sort of metrics of success around that. But where did this come from? Where did we get this idea that we should go to college and college is the best choice? And not only should we go to college, but we have to go right away at 18 and somehow know at 18 what life is going to be at that point and pursue this degree that's going to get us there.
When you look back a ways, a college degree was a pretty rare thing in the American population. It was for generally people who had a lot of money and came from an educated background. It was largely for white males. Mm-hmm. It was a very big thing when colleges for women started. I went to one of those. And so this was seen as something that you did if you were going to be a very big deal, because there were very few jobs that really needed a college degree. Doctor, even at the beginning, lawyers didn't even need degrees. And in California, they still don't. Wow. But in general, you were going to be something very educated that ordinary people could not do if you had a degree. And who wouldn't admire that? Right. To have that body of knowledge and skills, that's just extraordinary. Mm-hmm. And then that sort of built because we became a more affluent country and a more educated country. It got a big boost with my generation, the baby boomer generation. Our parents were largely not college graduated, but they wanted their kids to be college graduated. And so a lot of us were. And because we were college graduated, there was no way we were going to let our kids not be college graduated. Right. So all of a sudden, what had been a sort of rarity before now became the expectation that you were going to do this. Again, still in a very limited way. It was very hard for people of color to break through that barrier and get into colleges unless they had a lot of money and a lot of education somewhere in the background. Mm-hmm. But there was this among the yuppies, as we were called back in those days. The idea was there was not something astonishingly wonderful if you went to college. There was something wrong if you didn't go to college. Yeah. It was a shame. It was, people would come up and say, if you had a kid who was college age or a senior in high school, well, where is your kid going to college? It was just
Right.
an assumption. And
Right.
then it became such an assumption that we had really an overabundance of people with bachelor's degrees. And
Mm.
so because our schools sort of lowered their standards in a lot of ways, and people weren't coming out of high school very well educated, very well able to take on jobs in sales and human relations and managerial and so forth, people started thinking, well, you have to have a college degree. That's the only way you have the basic skills in writing and
Mhm.
thinking and smarts to do these jobs. You're separated from the other people. It's at least a way to make sure you have some of those skills. Then,
Mm.
there were so many college graduates that a fair number of them were graduating without the skills they needed that, believe it or not, in about 10 years ago, they started making graduate degrees be a requirement. And someone I know had a fellowship at a nonprofit and went for her first day at that fellowship and was told, and she was newly graduated from a very good university, and was told, no matter how well you do, no matter how good you are, if you're as good as our people who have been here 15, 20 years, in order to follow a professional track at this organization, you have to have a graduate degree.
Mhm.
She went back to her school, which offers kind of fast master's degrees for 1 year of study, one intensive year of study. And even her school said to her, you're not going to be more qualified to do this job with a master's.
Mhm.
We offer the master's because the employers are looking for it, not
Right.
because you are going to come out more capable of doing the job. You're fully capable of doing the job right now. So we've reached a stage where it's gotten crazy. And that's, so of course, if you don't go to college, society is telling you you are a has-been. You are going to have a second-rate life. And that got
Mhm.
worse, strange to say, during the Obama administration, when Bill Gates had a lot to say about education in this country, and he had a lot of influence.
Mm.
And his feeling was he wanted a lot more college graduates in this country because we were going to fall behind. We were not going to be able to compete in the 21st century economy if we did not have more and more and more college graduates. And President Obama made it a goal of his to, I think, graduate 11 million more college graduates by within a decade or so. And then, well, we'll get into more of this later, but what we actually found out is that a lot of those jobs didn't actually need a college degree. That what's happening with some of those jobs, like coding, I mean, it's hard to find a 16-year-old who can't code as well as your basic 40-year-old with a bachelor's degree. They started realizing, hey, what we need are skills, and and that doesn't necessarily mean a bachelor's degree. And that kind of started opening that door that maybe all these things where we thought we were going to fall behind without a bachelor's degree, what we really needed to do was talk about the skills people needed for work.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting because you got to witness by the time that college was something that I was thinking about, it was already really that necessity piece. I was in a family where my grandma had gone to college, all of her kids went to college, like you go to college. And interestingly enough, my husband is a first generation college student and went all the way through medical school. And we talk a lot about our high school experience because he was based on that information. He had already been sort of checkmarked in the side of he's never going to be anything more. And so he was always given the tech school pamphlets or the manual labor jobs and internship information. And so for him to break to the other side was very difficult. There was a lot less support. And so there was still this sort of elitism in how college was talked about and a lot of assumptions, but it was different in the sense that it was such a ubiquitous thing that I don't know a single one of my friends that didn't go to college. And we're all doing very different things. A significant number of us have very high education degrees, and only a few of us are actually doing something in that same training that we
Yeah.
had. And so just thinking about what you said, it basically, the sentiment of college actually started off in a really great place. Highly specialized training for the jobs that required it, like a physician. Like I can say that now, having been with my husband all the way through medical school and residency. There is no way that you could get to what he's doing without that specialized education. But if I'm going to be honest with you, as a therapist, I don't really think I needed to spend that much money and time getting a degree and learning everything I did to be good at my job. There was probably a lot of on the job training that could have happened where I could have gotten there. I'm thinking about this because I'm thinking about the status piece. Basically, it seemed like, I mean, that's the American dream. Everybody wants to achieve it because it means some status. So now we have to everybody wants to get there. That's this goal. And then we almost overdo it. So it's like, well, we got to get everybody here. And then there's this sort of competitive fear of we have to compete as a culture, as a community, as a country. So that's driving it. And basically what we end up seeing, and I would see this as a senior in college, I was a peer advisor for incoming freshmen. And
Uh-huh.
the idea that in a week, they're like, what am I going to major in? What classes am I going to take? What am I going to do? And I'm like, you're 18. That's crazy. I'm 22 and I still don't know what I want to do. Like right now at 37, I am very open to the fact that my life's going to change again and my career is going to look different. But at the time, I have to go here. This is the right answer. But really, you're just sort of plopped in this area where you know nothing. You have no information, but everybody's telling you this is right. So you should do it and pick something so that you can keep swimming forward just to fit in. But then most of us leave floundering in a pool where there's a bunch of us educated in something that gets us nowhere fast. And often in jobs that either didn't require the degree or that we didn't want to do because we just basically went through the system, a cog in the machine until we got to that point.
That is so true. There are a couple of statistics that really bear that out in big ways, especially going off to college without knowing what it is you want to do there. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily that you have to know exactly what you're going to major in and do for the rest of your life. But for kids who are just kind of like knocking around and they don't really have a concept of what their future will look like and what they're going to do at college, they think they're going to go to college and they're going to find out what it is they want to do for life. They're going to
Mm-hmm.
sort of randomly ping pong from one course to another, and they're going to learn what their great passion is and what they're going to do the rest of their life. It seldom works out that way. They ping pong through and they never really find it. They settle on something. They come out with something that maybe interested them, but they have no idea how they're going to turn that into a future. And this is where we see, and among those students who go in not really knowing why they're going to college, but they feel that they have to go to college and
Yes.
it's going to somehow work out. And especially if they are prodded and pushed by parents or teachers or even peers, of those students, they have found that 59% on the other side of college say college was a waste. That's that's pretty astonishing. And of those who get a bachelor's degree, 45% are underemployed a decade later. We're not talking about they come out and sort of knock around for a couple of years. A
Mm-hmm.
decade later, they're underemployed in jobs that don't require a bachelor's degree.
Right.
That's a pretty frightening idea. You've spent a lot of money to do something that someone could have done with an associate's degree or
Right.
just a high school diploma. You know, it's there are other reasons to go to college other than just what career are you going to have. College
Yeah.
is wonderful for opening your mind, for creating great citizens, for thinking deep thoughts and going, there's nothing as exciting as finding out something new that just makes you think in such big conceptual terms about the world. And that's
Mm-hmm.
great. I think philosophy majors are great. It's not that I don't think people should major in philosophy. I know a lot of people are very down on that. I just think you need to have some concept of what it is you want to do when you're at college and then how that's going to translate into your future after college. And colleges are first starting to think about how to translate what students are studying in school into the outside world and not just STEM careers, but philosophy, linguistics, which was my major, any of those things, studying a foreign language. Now they're starting to take that seriously. The Cal State system here in California, which is our largest university system, now is going to start a program under which they are going to be having students think about their future. Study what you want, but think about how that's going to translate. Philosophy majors have all kinds of great skills, but they
Yep.
don't think about those skills. What happens is these kids come out of college and they think back like people thought 40 years ago because their parents were thinking that way. And they think, I'm going to come out with my bachelor's degree. And because I have a bachelor's degree, I'm going to make more money than someone who doesn't. And I'm going to come out and the world will be waiting for me because I'm very bright and I have this bachelor's degree. And they come out and they spread 500 resumes all over the place and they don't get a single call back because employers are inundated with bachelor's degree holders. They've got loads and loads of them. If they don't see what your skills are, if they don't see what makes you special, they're not going to respond. You need a skill that they need, and you need to know how to translate that to them.
When I'm thinking about, for me, one of the things that I didn't really become aware of it until I was getting my master's degree is that I was, a 4.3 something student in school. Like I was the A plus, took all the AP classes through high school. I had a 4.0 through college. I was the person that was always performing and getting the grades. And I think one of the things that is often missed is that for many of us growing up, we were just told the next thing to do. And the idea of learning and failing and flailing, at least for me, that was never really the thing that was taught. It was how to get the A.
It's really true.
How to get the A to get to the next thing. And so when you go through all the way through high school, the goal in front of you the whole time is to keep getting better grades, to get the better scholarships, to get into the better schools. No one's really talking to you about, did you learn anything? Like I didn't read a single book in any of my English classes in high school. I knew how to take Cliff Notes and basically read the summary. And I'm a very good writer, so I could write it convincingly enough that people knew that what I was trying to convey, and it sounded like I read the book. But all I did was learn how to basically cheat the system to get an A. I didn't learn how to read and really think about these things or perform in certain ways. And so I think for many of us, there's a larger issue that we have to think about from like parent, caregiver, larger institutional issues, these companies you're mentioning, because there's a whole pin I'm putting in that to come back to. But I think as an individual, when someone basically has told me what to do all the way through 12th grade, the idea that they're telling me what to do next, I'm going to take it because one, I haven't even been thought that I'm allowed to question it. And then two, I'm scared shitless at the idea that I'm going to now ask myself a question I've never asked myself, which is, who are you? What brings you joy? What do you want? What is learning like for you? Where do you get passionate? And if you want to study X, like I got a full ride scholarship to art school, I turned it down because of the bias around me and the internalized bias of artists aren't really, that it's not a good career. I'm never going to make any money. I'm never going to be substantial. That's not the status that at the time when I was put on the med school track that would give me. And I'm supposed to want success, security, achievement, whatever that is. So we don't entertain the passion. We suppress that. Just like your emotions, just like everything else, your wants, your needs, and you perform. And I feel like that's a big issue that's often missed, is thinking about how we don't cultivate the learning experience, we cultivate the performing experience.
Absolutely. That's the way schools work. I don't want to blame the schools too much because the leaders who are in charge of the schools, who are not educators themselves, are forcing them into that pathway.
Yes.
You know, one of the big things for me is that school counselors do not know how to counsel students who don't want to go to college.
Right.
What they tell them is if you're not going to college, you can join the military or you can do the skilled trades. Now, both are great options. I have chapters on each in the book, but there is so much more people can do. And the school counselors have no idea. And I'm not going to blame the school counselors because no one teaches them.
Yes.
But also at the policy level, we have been telling these schools for years now, we are going to judge you by how many students you send off to four-year colleges. So what are you going to do? Just like when you want to get an A, you're going to figure out the system. How do I get an A? Right? They figure out the system. How am I going to send kids off to college? I talked to one school counselor in Sheboygan who said they were doing the college thing. And they would survey their kids every year and they would find out how many were going off to four-year colleges. And 80% of them said they were going off to four-year colleges. So they thought, we're doing the right thing. We're doing well. Then they got the figures from the National Clearinghouse on Education, which those figures became available at one point. And they took a look at it and they realized the kids had not been telling them what was really going on.
Yeah.
Only 50% of them were going on to four-year colleges. And the counselor I talked to said, we had been failing to serve half of our students. We had just been leaving them out in the dust,
Mm-hmm.
and they completely redid their counseling. Now they're still very focused on skilled trades if you're not doing
Mm-hmm.
it, but they have a whole apprenticeship program around it. And it's an area that still has a lot of manufacturing going on, and it's working for them. I'd love to
Right.
see them expand that. I'd love to see school counselors just have my book. If you don't know what to tell people, read the book and you can tell them, or
Mm-hmm.
hand them the book and say, here, read about some of the possibilities, expand your mind, see that there are people like you that the world would have thought of and said, oh, you're a high school dropout with ADHD. Oh, you're a nobody. You have
Mm-hmm.
dyslexia. Why should I respect you? Who are phenomenal successes in not just in their careers, but in life. They are
Yeah.
leading happy, fulfilled, meaningful lives.
Well, and I think it's interesting because when you were talking about the school systems, the word that came to my mind was compliance. The schools and the teachers, there's sort of a hierarchical system of basically just compliance that comes all the way down to the kids. So the kids
Yeah.
need to comply, they need to do X, Y, and Z. And I think there's a pressure as a parent for that as well. Oftentimes, I think parents are really guided by this sense of compliance. That's what we were taught growing up. For most of us in a parent or caregiver role, we experienced conditional love based on compliance, whether that was your parent or caregiver, teachers, other people. And so there's this idea of sort of a hierarchy that reinforces compliance. And I think what ends up happening now, kind of thinking about from the parent caregiver side, is your kids become this representation of your success. And so if my kid doesn't go to
Um,
college, it's now a reflection on me. They are non-compliant with what the success plan looks like, and it reflects poorly on me. And so it's less, I'm afraid of what happens if they fail at this or if they can't figure these things out. And it's more, what are people going to think about me and where I failed as a parent? And I think
oh, that's huge.
getting out of our way with that is hard because we all say on the surface, no, I'm going to love my kid no matter what. But we think we will do that. And yet our fear response system is strong, and protecting them from hurt and particularly protecting us from shame, I think, become really big drivers in not opening that conversation to what would it be like if you did learn differently? What if we tried homeschooling? What if you didn't go to college? What if you did volunteer? The questions feel they're too scary to open up because the answers are ambiguous, and we need control and simplicity to ensure that compliance, to then ensure success, validation, and perpetual, even if it's a false sense of respect and fitting in, we need that on some level.
Yes, parents are terrifically fearful, and they want their children to quote unquote succeed.
Right.
They want them to have all those trappings that they've been taught you need to have. And so the, their willingness to helicopter their kids, their desire to helicopter their kids, which has gotten worse and worse. I thought it was bad 12 years ago. It is, I'm just stunned at the stuff that happens now. And, I remember when my kids were in elementary school here in California in fourth grade, they always used to do this thing where you build a model of a mission, one of the Catholic missions. And my kid, I gave her some poster board and some crayons and whatever, and she built whatever totally messy looking thing she built. And then we went in, and there were missions there that I swear to you, they're famous for the sugar cubes. This is the only thing that sugar cubes are used anymore for, is building
Yes.
models of the mission. And there were sugar cube missions in there that could not have been built by anyone less than an architect.
Mhm.
And you're sitting there going, come on, you're going to tell
Right.
me that a fourth grader did this.
Right.
That's insane. And it goes all the way up. I love to join Facebook groups because I like to learn about different things and
Mhm.
see the people in them. And among the groups that I'm in is one of parents who are wanting to help their kids get into good schools. Sometimes they're very intent on the very tippy top rated schools. And you see these questions about, my child has this GPA and that SAT, and is it better to spend the time and money on them tutoring, or is it better to spend the time and money on this? And will they be able to get in if they don't have a published research project? And should they take an IB course or an AP course or a dual enrollment course? And I'm just sitting there screaming. It's gotten so much more intense than even when my kids were there. And my daughter entered college 9 years ago. It's so insane. And I'm sitting there going, why are you even the first problem I see here is, why are you asking these questions instead of kids asking the questions? Why are you searching for their universities instead of them searching for their universities? We're not giving kids a chance to have any kind of autonomy over their own lives. And yes, they're going to fail at some stuff. And that's how they're going to grow up. I just saw this new poll that looked at high school students and college students and how they feel about their future. And they feel that they are not prepared for the real world. And guess what? Employers agree. They don't know about the real world. They don't know about adulting. They don't know about all kinds of basic things. They're desperately afraid of failing. They are very competitive. They don't know how to work as a team with others. They don't know how to find mentors. They don't know how to network. These are all people skills and also communication skills. Who doesn't teach people skills? Gee, would it be our current high school curriculum? Would it be our current college curriculum? Yes. They don't teach any people skills. They're not teaching the things you really know. And meanwhile, parents are trying so hard to keep their kids from failing instead of realizing the value of failing. Not everybody who comes out of high school jumps into a great apprenticeship or job, and some of them do, but jumps into this and says, aha, I have found my passion. Life is perfect.
Right.
You see people in my book, they knocked around for a while. They tried this, it didn't work out. They tried that, it didn't work out. But they weren't trying it for $80,000 a year, which is what college costs you. And then they find it. And sometimes, when they find it, they do it for a while and then they say, I think I want to take this one to college. I think I want to go to college and get the degree to be able to do that higher level stuff. And at that point, they know what they want. They are going with intentionality. They can write an essay about why they want to go to this school and study this thing. They can write about their experiences, their successes, their failures. When I look at what college admissions officers are looking for these days, it is not for one more AP course.
Right.
It is for authentic people who know something about themselves and who have intention and who are interesting. And how do you become an interesting person? Do you do it by complying and taking all the courses that your school tells you to take? No, you become interesting by taking an interest in the world. Interesting people are interested. Always, always, always. And we don't give them a chance to do that. People say, which extracurricular activities should I have my child in? And thank goodness there are other parents in the group that will chime in and say, the one they're really interested in. And if they're not interested in something, you haven't given them enough exposure to the world or enough chance to knock around and find what they might be interested in. Heck, let them go get a job. You find out a lot about your interests then. And you learn a lot of responsibility too.
I think there's two things that's coming up to me as you say this. So one, I'm thinking about, so we're kind of thinking about the schools and the compliance piece. We're thinking about parents and caregivers and the compliance piece, and kids are internalizing that. This is what I have to be good enough. This is my worth. This is my value. And they play into the systems. And I feel like I've seen it where there's a problem on both sides. If all the generations before you have gone to college and you're not going to college, and then also if all of the generations before you haven't gone to college and maybe worked on a farm or worked in manual labor, and then you're going, and there's a cycle breaking in there that's really tricky to navigate. So there's definitely some family systems dynamics pieces in some of these conversations. But I also think about the hyper independence component to the American dream. So as you're describing this and you're thinking about, again, my daughter's only 5. And this morning she was talking about, she's like, why is Grammy always giving me soda cans? And I said, well, because in Oregon, when she has a sparkling water can or whatever, we pay a deposit, we get that 10 cents back every time. And we can directly deposit that into your 529 account. well, what's my 529 account? I'm explaining this to her and I'm using these very careful words. If you decide to get educated beyond high school, if you decide to do any deeper learning, maybe that's college, maybe that's something else. And we're kind of starting these conversations. But again, she's 5. So my hope is she understands they're there. And also, I am not leading the horse to water. I'm wanting the horse to explore the field. And so as I'm thinking about this, because she doesn't quite yet understand that there's going to come a time she doesn't want to be with us, she's like, I'd have to live somewhere else. I would be somewhere else. And like, I realize as you're talking, how many parents and caregivers and kids is the idea that you're 18, get out, move on, go to college, move out, get an apartment. You are ready to be independent. You are ready to vote. You are ready to do all of the big kid things because you're an adult now and I am no longer responsible. And I think because we've built these systems that are parents are embarrassed if their 23-year-old is still living at home, if their 30-year-old is still living at home. But what you're describing of what if somebody graduates and they want to take an unpaid internship somewhere to explore? What if they want to go do a volunteering event? It would also require some restructuring of our system on a more collectivistic side of not thinking the goal is to get your kids out the door at 18. And maybe it is. Maybe they do want to live somewhere else and they want to be on their own and independent. There are times that's a really important conversation. But I also think there has to be more of a communal understanding of that. And if we're going to give kids time to learn what they want to do, I didn't start my master's degree until I was 26. I had 4 years off from undergrad until I decided I was going to get my master's. And that 4 years made a big difference. And when I started my career, and I'm getting my master's training. Again, I still think that probably not all of that was required to pay that much money for. But the people that came in at 21 and 22 years old, I remember feeling like, oh, they're not ready to do this. I don't feel like they're ready to be here. I don't think some of them know why they're here. And not as a judgment, but of this notion and this idea of, I didn't know what I wanted to do at that point. At 26, I'm still not totally sure and I'm exploring, but I have found the thing that gives me so much passion. It gets me out of bed in the morning. I don't think everyone has that yet. And so just kind of thinking about all of that, it feels like the next layer to think about is reframing or challenging some of the systems of what our societal structure looks like and moving out of sort of that state of hyper independence and more towards a collectivistic or sort of cultural shared accountability for taking care of each other to create the opportunity to explore those things.
This really is going to require a change in our society, in our culture, as well as in our education system. We need to stop this idea that certain kinds of people with certain kinds of education are worth looking up to and others aren't. We certainly look up to our plumbers when we need them because they have skills that we can't begin to have. And that happens to me all the time. So we need to realize it's not a matter of this one has higher skills as opposed to this one has skills and they're valuable skills or great talents. And we use those skills. We benefit from those skills and talents. And this is a wonderful thing. And those people should be admired. But when we don't do that as a society, schools don't do that because they're under pressure to produce the kinds of people that people will admire. Parents feel the pressure. I know that a neighbor of mine, when I asked what her son was doing, and he had just graduated high school, and she said, he's going to the local community college. And I said, oh, that's great. And she said, well, he's never been a student. And I thought she immediately feels she needs to somehow excuse this, say she's sorry for it, that something's wrong with him, that he's going to the local community college, where it's great that he's going to the local community college. That sort of sense of, gosh, you're kind of a disappointment to me if you weren't going off to some big name school. That kind of pressure that parents feel then falls directly on their kids. And the kids feel it from their parents. They feel it from their teachers. They feel it from their counselors. They feel it even from their peers because their peers are feeling the same pressure. So they're all talking about, where are you going to college? And if you say the local community college, or you say the military, or you say,
I actually want to work for a while. I want to
Mm-hmm.
travel and go volunteer on organic farms across the world and find out all kinds of interesting things and learn great skills and see what it's like living in other countries. And who knows where that's going to take me. People go, oh, that sounds exciting. But they go, well, he's going nowhere.
Yes.
So, and it takes a lot of personal confidence and individuality to be willing to say that, to be willing to say, I'm going to go against the conventional route.
Yeah.
So, with all that pressure coming from so many different directions, you can see that anyone who makes the decision not to follow that route already has stuff going for them because
Yeah.
they're willing to say, I'm not going to do something just because you believe in it, just because the people around me believe in it, just because it's the conventional wisdom that this is what you need to do. I am going to go find myself the things that mean something to me. I'm going to learn things in new and meaningful ways, not just in a
Mm-hmm.
classroom. That takes a lot of strength. That takes a lot of moxie.
Yeah.
And people who have that kind of strength and moxie are going to go places. And
Yeah.
I think our job as parents, as educators, as a society, are to help them get that moxie. I
Yeah.
mean, we hear constant complaints from employers and parents about how this is a very entitled generation coming up. They expect things to be done for them. They don't know how to take initiative. But we're not teaching any of those skills.
Right.
We're not teaching them moxie. We're not teaching them independent thinking. We'd have, I think, much more interesting people in our world and people who are accomplishing a lot more if we stopped them feeling like something isn't worthwhile unless we are spoon feeding it to them and telling
Yeah.
them that it is worthwhile.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's this sort of generation of the participation trophies. I still
Yes.
remember going to this women's event, and this woman was up on a panel talking about her son and how she wouldn't let him take the participation trophy home. And she's like, your team lost. You did great. And you can celebrate that. And you don't get a trophy. You lost. Like, it is okay to lose. And we're not going to make sure that everybody feels good and feels like everybody wins and give everybody a trophy. It's just not a thing we're going to do. And she talked about sort of the pushback she'd get from these people in her life, family, friends, things like that. And she's like, because he needs to understand how to fail. And I think what you've described kind of throughout this is really this pressure that, it's a chicken or the egg. Did it come from the individual and it grew to the societal? Did it start on some larger entity and it trickled down? We don't know, but it's here. And I think that pressure to perform has made it where, again, the schools, the parents, and the individual kids, these emerging adults are like, I just have to get to this level. I have to be at this level. And so we're trying to rig the game to make sure that people can get there instead of really focusing on what we know matters. And so when you talked about this idea of even a plumber and their skills and how important they are, it brought up this idea to me of contribution and our
Yes.
contribution to the greater good, the greater community, the world. How are we adding value? And I think there's two pieces to that. One, you as an individual are worth celebrating, being honored. You are valuable just by being a human, but also thinking about when we are, I have this conversation with my 5-year-old where we'll say, don't be basic. And the idea is don't try to be like everyone else. I want you to be you. And sometimes that means that you're going to be on this side of the bell curve. And sometimes that means you're going to be right in the middle. And sometimes you're on this side of the bell curve. It doesn't matter where you are as long as it's authentic to you. And we are celebrating
Yes.
that. And that, I think, again, sort of your message is that we have some shifting we need to do and some uncomfortable conversations. And so as we think about where we go with all of this, I'm curious, what would you want to see change kind of at those three levels? What do we need to do at a systems level if we're thinking about community, schools? What do we need to invite or reflect on or change as parents and caregivers? And ultimately, what do we want to see happen to those individual kids, these young people that are developing their authentic self so they don't get lost in the shuffle?
That's a great question because it needs to happen at so many levels. Part of it is political. We have politically pushed at times for all the kids to go to college. That was actually a marker of the Obama administration, where the idea was to vastly increase the number of students going to college and getting a bachelor's degree. No one seemed to think, the idea was, well, the jobs of the 21st century are going to require a bachelor's degree. And it never seemed to occur to anybody, as well-meaning as they were, and as much as they wanted to open college to more people. But it never even occurred to anybody to say, gosh, is this a job that someone might be able to do without a bachelor's degree? Maybe the difference isn't that the jobs are going to require a bachelor's degree and therefore everybody needs a bachelor's degree. Maybe we need to be talking to employers about what the requirements are for their jobs and does it make sense for those jobs to require a bachelor's degree? And that is something that without any help from government, really, employers have been starting to discover themselves. They have been dropping bachelor's degree requirements. It's not huge yet, but it's definitely significant. There are some very, very big companies doing it because they're realizing what people need is training. They need maturity. They need a helping hand. It's actually in ways, a very important change because it used to be for a long time, companies were expecting schools to turn out perfectly trained people for their jobs. And they didn't want to put anything into the training. That wasn't working out so well. They still say students are coming out without the skills they need. Now there has been a turnaround with more companies saying, how about if we do the training and we train them to have the skills that we need? People need training and the schools can't train everybody for everything. So I'm glad to see private employers taking on more of that responsibility. We're also seeing states that are removing a lot of their bachelor's degree requirements for state jobs. A lot of people aren't going to college, and that doesn't mean they should have a second-rate life. As we see that expand, and now Governor Gavin Newsom in California is starting to talk about turning that into a practicality where we start getting private industry joined up with schools more along the lines of what they do in Switzerland, so that students can combine their schooling with actual practical skills that they can learn from private employers. The California State University system now has a new system in place where it's all about what are you going to do with your education? You're still going for a bachelor's, but what are you going to do with it? Which is something that I really believe in. Again, to me, it's not about going to college for the career. I'm all in favor of going to college to learn philosophy, to learn about the great religions. But you do have to give thought to what are the skills I'm going to learn doing that? And what do I want to do with those skills after I get out? And what do I need to be able to do the things that I want to do? And gosh, if I've identified the skills that I need to come out of college with, I am going to make sure that I gain those skills instead of just sort of meandering through my courses, doing what it is the professor requires. I'm going to be looking for opportunities to come out of college with knowledge, with the ability to think, and with skills. So then comes the education system. And it's interesting that you asked about this because I'm now in talks with one of the top education leaders in the country about writing another book, this one about the schools we need. What are the schools we need? And really to stop thinking in these sort of small, petty terms that we've been in about, do you get rid of the cell phones? Do you care about this standardized test? There were just the national standardized tests came out and they showed that students had not fully recovered after the pandemic and they weren't reading at grade level. And I was sitting there going, I wonder if I went into these fourth grade classrooms, would I really see kids who can't read? Or did they not do well on this test? They might not have known exactly how to answer the questions. I'll tell you, I've seen some of those tests and some of the questions are pretty weird themselves. So, and if you think it all creatively, you're going to get the wrong answer. You have to do the most basic, obvious answer for those tests.
You have to perform. You have to perform rather than think, which again goes back to the whole point we said, which is the conveyor belt. They have to excel on the conveyor belt and know what someone else is thinking, which I guess in a way that is a skill to be able to figure out what other people are looking for and want, but we're trying to teach and train independent, individual, authentic thought, not just do what you think the the boss or the leader or the testing company wants you to pick, but how do you actually make sense of this? And you're right. That is taken away when the whole thing is, I think what you said of like, what are the schools we need versus what are the schools we have? And the schools we have, if we're focused again on the metrics are important, but it feels to me like maybe we can't make them the guiding principle for how we move forward because these metrics aren't necessarily giving us accurate information. We're deducing things that still reinforce the conveyor belt.
Right. And we also know that high school students, we know from a recent giant Gallup poll done on it, that high school students who do not want to go to college feel that they don't get a chance to show what it is they do well. They feel like they're ignored. They feel that no matter what they say, all anybody says to them is college, college, college.
Right.
And if they want advice about what they can do without college, 80% of them say that they can't get that information at their schools. Most kids say they're bored. They don't see the relevance of what they're learning there. We need to change that. We need to make learning something that students want to do. School should be an exciting place. And we've gotten stuck in kind of a rut about you learn this, you learn about the Revolutionary War, I don't know, at least 2 times during your school years, if not 3 times, instead of thinking, what is going to engage students? Yes, we want them to come out informed citizens, but how do we engage them? How do we give them the opportunity to not warm a seat in a classroom and instead get up and do something with what they're learning so that learning actually means something to them?
I mean, I'm thinking about too, because as you're thinking about this, so we've talked about the change sort of on a political level, and you looped in sort of the job component, which I think is really interesting. This notion that it's not really for maybe the federal government or sort of the oversights to be making decisions that then jobs are sort of deciding, well, yeah, we're going to require this, but instead going, actually, we don't need this. We don't need these things. And so I think that's a really beautiful separation of, a lot of the workforce or these employers sort of defaulting to maybe what this larger entity was doing or saying, and maybe wanting to be supportive of that, but also recognizing that's actually not helpful. And so we're seeing that shift. And then we start to talk about the school systems, and we're starting to see shifts in the schools, and we're seeing, okay, we need to be thinking about, like, I love the practicum idea. That was the biggest thing I got from my master's degree. Like, that year alone is what I think made me a good therapist, was going out and doing therapy and flopping and getting feedback. And yes, I needed some of the coursework and the training prior to that to be able to put it into practice at a basic level, but it was so much more. And so to think about that, so we're thinking about these pieces, we're starting to see where those shifts need to happen. We look at more than just the standardized test or getting rid of the phone, but how do we get kids excited to learn and to think about what they bring to the table? So we're adding those pieces in. As you're talking about this, and I'm thinking, okay, the other 2 players here now are sort of the caregivers or the parents, and then the individual kids. And it's interesting because the more we're talking, the more it feels like the kids are really less the issue. It's everything else that strips them away. So it almost feels like the kids just need to keep being themselves, like showing their interest, being excited, being willing to show us those like curious moments and stand up for things. But we need to see the changes at these bigger levels. And my guess is, yes, we need the system changes, but that the parents and the caregivers are going to play a really pivotal role in this, because even if the school system changes, if at home they're still getting, well, did you get an A or did you get a C? Did you do this? Did you not? You have to go to school. You have to learn these things, instead of, okay, if you got a C in history, probably not going to make that big of a difference in your life as a whole. I'm really not going to worry too much about that, because you're not that interested, but you're getting A's in coding and this stuff. And your goal is you want to go on and build video games. What the hell difference does history make? And so loop us in now to the parent change. What do you think really needs to shift in the home systems to make any of these bigger changes even matter for these kids?
I think parents are very, very nervous these days. I mean, we talk about, kids they expect things to just come to them. They're entitled, blah, 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 blah. I think a lot of that comes from a generation of extremely nervous parents who think that if anything goes wrong, their child is doomed. And
Yes.
doom is anything other than a professional job that makes at least, X amount of money per year.
Yes.
Again, very, very conventional. People are very afraid for their kids to follow an unconventional direction because they won't have prestige, they won't have money. A lot of them do get prestige and money, but they are kept from doing it in the way that they wanted to do it. Parents need to be opened by schools into, I guess I'd call it a more entrepreneurial way of educating kids, not in the sense of trying to turn everybody into billionaires, but
Right.
more individualistic thinking. We want to open the world to your kid. What parents really want for their kids is for their kids to be happy
Yeah.
and safe,
Yes.
right? You want them to be happy and safe. We have come to equate these professional jobs with X amount of salary as happy, as safe, and that if our kids are safe, then they will be happy. It's
Yeah.
natural. I'm a parent of 3 adult kids. I want them to be safe. I want them to be fine. But above all, I want them to be happy. And I have seen enough of kids who come out of college. They follow what they thought they wanted. They have a professional job. They're well paid. And they're saying, I think I made a mistake and this isn't really what I want. It is so sad having just one life to spend that life feeling like, well, I was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And is that really what we want to look back on when we're 85, 90 years old? Is
Right.
I was okay. It was
Right.
all right. I didn't
Yeah.
really have any exciting things to report to you. I didn't really have anything that felt exciting to me.
Right.
That to me is very, very sad. Parents need to know. They need to know the results of overly high expectations, of pressure,
Mm-hmm.
of what makes for happiness for their kids, of the results of the stress that students feel these days. We need parents to understand what their kids need to truly succeed because they need the ability to take risks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who's going to be a creative or entrepreneurial or try to do something that really means something to them, unless it's, for some people, med school really does mean it. And then they need to go through the things that they need to go through for med school.
What you just said is so key. And I want to make sure that people listening don't shame themselves, but also don't dismiss it. Because I think what you said is this idea that all of these pressures and these norms have created this anxiety in us as parents that we need to be perfect parents. And a reflection of being a perfect parent is our kid achieving at XYZ level. Now, on a very conscious, cognitive way, I think most people would be like, no, you're right. I do just want my kid to be happy. I want them to live a life that they can feel safe. And that means being able to pay their bills and not being worried about housing insecurity or things like that. But we lose that in the chaos of the doing. It's what happens to all of us. I mean, I struggle with if I didn't work today, I would be okay. If I needed a mental health day, if I'm like, I need to take the day off, I need a rest, or if I'm sick, when I've gotten bad colds and I've forced myself to work through them, even though my body probably just wanted a day to sleep and rest, there's this notion that something's going to happen if I take a day off. And as an entrepreneur, it was
Right.
huge. I don't know how to take a break. The pressure is there that I've always got to be at the A. And we've put that on our kids instead of
Yes.
realizing growth can't happen if they can't some days get an F for the day, get a D, get a C, however they want to grade their day. Like I did nothing. How did that feel? Well, that actually felt good. And the next day I was able to go in and I was recharged. Awesome. Or I'm not engaging in this. What am I learning? Or I tried this thing and here I learned I don't have the skills to do this yet. I need to go back to get them. And so then the buy-in changes. And I think even as adults, many of us are doing without really having the buy-in ourselves. We're just so scared if we stopped. You have a book. You alluded to it. You're already in talks to work on your second book. But this first book, I think, particularly for the caregivers, I think is so powerful. And so can you tell people a little bit more about your book, where they can get it, and kind of what your goal was in doing that?
This was something I had started writing about as an editorial writer for the Los Angeles Times, and looking at people who had tremendous skills and couldn't get jobs because of the bachelor's degree requirements. It came from looking at school districts that were requiring all the courses that here in California are required to go to the University of California. And all students had to get at least a C in all of these courses, which is it's a huge number of courses, in order to graduate high school. And I'm sitting there going, that's nuts. What if they have no interest in that? And if they need those courses later on, they can get those courses later on. So why are we going to deprive them of a high school graduation because of our own decision that their life is not worth leading if they don't go to UC? As I looked at it more and more, I wanted to find out, okay, it's worth saying we're starting to buy into the idea that you don't really have to have a college education. But then now that you've accepted that, as I said, I in no way put down college. If that's what you want, by all means, go for it.
Absolutely.
If that's the thing that fits with you and you know what you want from it, that's a terrific future.
Yep.
But there are other equally terrific futures. And we need to stop thinking in terms of the higher path and the lower path. And it's just multiple paths. And I thought, well, what really is out there for these students? Because they're not getting it from their teachers. They're not getting it from their counselors, maybe in a way that makes sense because these are all college educated people, right? They believe in college education. So that's what they want for these students. They look at it from one particular point of view. I'm starting to see change in that. I am starting to hear from more counselors who say, yes, this is something I needed to hear, or this is something I've believed for a long time, but could never practice before. I want to help people find a great life. That's why the book is saying Rethinking College, a guide to thriving without a degree. I don't want you to just be able to live without a degree. I want you to thrive. I want you to have a terrific life that is in no way inferior to anything. I found out all these interesting things about the ways in which college degrees are not the be all and end all. The 45% of college graduates who 10 years later are in jobs that don't require a college degree.
Right.
Now, if they loved getting their college degree and they were able to pay it off, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I don't think that's what they had in mind.
Yeah.
I think they had in mind they'd come out with a bachelor's and they would get a professional level job that paid well and had security. And that's on top of the 40%, 30 to 40% who don't graduate four-year school even after they've started it. So if that's not the answer, what is the answer? And I felt like I want to give people the information to see what the real possibilities are, including that if you go to college, you might not end up with such a great job. You might not end up knowing what you want to do, and to talk to them about the kinds of things that they can do with real people there, real people who did it themselves. My wish is that every school counselor in the nation would have it. So that when we have these kids who are saying 80% of the kids saying that if they don't want to go to college, no one's helping them, that their school counselor will have read the book and can talk about these things with them. If the school counselor doesn't want to read the book or doesn't want to get involved in that, hand the kid the book and say, here, go leaf through this. See some of the possibilities that are out there for you. See what it takes to do them. Because I get very specific with a lot of them. What does it take to go into Hollywood, filmmaking?
Right.
What does it take to become a writer? What does it take to become one of the highest rated bread makers in the United States?
Right.
So where do you find the apprenticeships? Because more private employers are doing apprenticeships. So it was to help people have a big inspirational guide, and also a very specific guide about what the possibilities are for them, and tests that include, what do you like? What is the kind of person you are?
Yeah.
I think even colleges are wanting to see more of that. Colleges see plenty of people who have AP courses all over the yin yang.
Right.
They want people who are authentic. They want people who are interesting. How do you be an interesting person? By being interested in the world around you. Your kid really will be okay if they don't go to college, or if they don't go to college right away.
Yeah. I think that, listeners, the biggest thing I'm taking from this is the ability for all of us to be a bit more curious and to be a bit more process versus output oriented. And so there is no guarantee that a 4-year college degree is going to get you a great job, just the same as there's no guarantee that if your child wants to go off and travel for 3 years, that they're not going to find everything that brings them joy and be financially successful and live a great life. We have these predictions, these projections of what a successful, full, good, wonderful, happy, whatever it is, life is going to be. And we are trying to create that for them. And we are taking this pressure on that there is a very small tunnel that everybody's got to get through to get to that outcome. And I think if we could all give ourselves a little bit more grace, but also kind of lose a bit of the ego to think that we know how everything's going to turn out. Therefore, we know what's best and we're going to guide in that direction. And I think that's the change at the system level and the individual level is a bit of that, a bit about being curious and asking questions rather than making assumptions and then leading from that place. And so I'm going to have links down in the show notes that you can see more of Karin's work, not just this book, but all of her other writing. We know that change doesn't just happen, boom, everything's better. It is about the ripples. It is about the willingness to ask tough questions, to be curious, to say, I wonder, what if we tried it this way? What if we asked questions instead of told them what to do? Everly's 5, and I'm still learning so much about how I want to reframe the way that I think about school and learning and education and taking the pressure off of me that it's not my job to do all of these things. It's my job to empower her to be curious and to support that and to promote that and help her think about a full life. And so I know I'm going to be coming back to this episode every few years probably as I'm moving forward in this journey. And so this is here for you whenever you need it. Of course, please share this with someone else you think could benefit from hearing it. If you liked this episode, let us know in the comments what came up for you, your biggest aha, takeaway, or questions for Karin so that we can go deeper in this for you. As always, we will be back here next Sunday, and I will see you then.